Professor Sivaraman Venkataraman. He has pursued his Bachelor's of Architecture at the School of Architecture and Planning, SAP, South India's premier academy of architecture and design. He has worked as an architectural student trainee, as an assistant architect, as an associate designer, as an architectural assistant, and as an architect at several institutes and organizations. Since May 2013 until date, he has his own consulting practice. Apart from this, he also works as an assistant professor and as a visiting faculty at the Prime College of Architecture and Planning, Anna University. He has also worked as an associate professor and as a visiting faculty at Deer Institute, Anna University, and at Midas Swarna Bhumi, Anna University. He has won 4 gold medals and silver medal in national level competitions organized by Rashtriya Sanskrit Sansthan, representing Tamil Nadu for the past consecutive 5 years.
This is AR 6203 Theory of Architecture Part 2, Unit 3. In Unit 2, we saw the character of a building, how to identify and understand character of a building and the style of a building. Unit 3 perhaps is the most important unit of all this Theory of Architecture Part 2. Why? Because we are going to learn from the examples done by masters. So, we are going to see the works of architects, and in this unit we will be trying to understand the role of individual creators in the generation of architectural form through the history of architecture, studying their works, ideologies and philosophy. So, your assignments will be very of high nature as well. So, we will have to deeply study each and individual architects. Let us go through some of the examples of these periods. What happens is we have got thousands of architects and creations and creators, but for the sake of education, for the sake of academy, what I have done is I have taken only 40 to 50 prominent architects who ever lived, and then I have tried to express their individuality in giving form to, or in their search of form in architecture through their examples. So, it will be 40 architects in this whole lecture. So, let us see their works. Michelangelo Buonarroti was the greatest sculptor who ever lived, who was the most influential artist, sculptor and architect as well. Not many people know that he was also an architect, but he was an exemplary artist. Of his genius is seen through works like The Birth of Adam, is a fresco painting in Sistine Chapel, the sculpture of David, the Ideal Man, done in marble. This is a Laurentian library, the entrance to the Laurentian library inside St. Peter's, Rome, and this is the Pieta, the exemplary sculpture that is still there in Florence Museum. This is the interior of the Sistine Chapel he painted, wherein the part of the painting that we saw, the Birth of Adam, is also here. Another view of that. This is a plan he designed for the St. Peter's, Rome, in Rome, Vatican. During the Renaissance period, see the symmetrical architecture that he has done. The plaza that he designed along with Raphael in Vatican. This is a building that he designed, the St. Peter's, Rome's dome. It was a very unique dome of its time. The style is very unique. You can see the kind of designs that he has done, the modeling that he has done. We will go to the examples of modernism. Now, we will see Aldo Rossi. Aldo Rossi, one of the earliest theoreticians as well as architects, and he was known for his drawings as well, because it was all done manually. And this building is an exemplary from Italy. It is a cemetery building. Cemetery, look at the way he has used the simplified forms. This is a hotel in Japan. So, it was the beginning of the modernism, where he was trying to build everything without ornamentation. We will now see Alvar Aalto. This one is the Finlandia Hall in Finland, where he belonged. This was built in the 1920s. You can see the kind of freshness that he has brought in this building, the way he has tried to go away from the decorative buildings. This one is the Seinäjoki Community Hall. It was a very famous building during this time, and he was known for using the contours of the area according to the nature of the building. This one is the Vitra Museum. that is designed. See how he wanted to break away from the regular conventions of building architecture. Alvaro Siza is another architect from Portugal, and his building, his search of form. This is a fire station building. This was done in the 50s. See how he is breaking away to give a new unique structure. This is a Mimesis Art Museum. This is a Portuguese pavilion that he has done for Expo 98, and this one is a public auditorium in Linares. Look at the way the simplicity is expressed to bricks itself. The plain forms without any decorations, the organization of spaces, use of materials, use of straight lines, the order, the proportions that he has used. Alvaro Siza was awarded the Pritzker Prize. Antoni Gaudí was another exemplary architect. He was hailed as one of the greatest creative architect of his time. He was from Spain. Look at the buildings that he has done. He never makes any architectural drawings, scaled drawings. He just makes sketches, and then he makes his craftspeople come out with exemplary execution. He belonged to the Barcelona area, what is called the Catalonian region. This building is still not completed because they could not figure out how to do these buildings in real materials. See, it has been built for more than 100 years now. This is a Sacred Heart building, the Sagrada Familia building in Barcelona. This was the most visited building in Barcelona even today. It is one of the Gaudí's villas that he has designed for some of his clients. This is the kind of architecture he goes for. He is directly influenced by nature and its way of expressing itself. This is one building not built by Gaudí, but it is inspired by Gaudian architecture, and which is the use of mosaic nature of colors and materials. This building is in Brazil. Arata Isozaki is a Japanese architect who has tried different styles in his lifetime. He is still a strong going contemporary architect. He started his architecture from the 60s under the master Kenzo Tange. This is the art tower in Mito. Another view of that. See how he has evolved his forms from derivations of geometrical pattern, geometrical buildings. This is the Broad Museum in Los Angeles. Is one of his recent works. See how he has gone from geometry into different patterns of expressing his own ideas. He was also hailed as one of the postmodernist architect. Look at the postmodernism ideas that he has gone for in these buildings. This is a Disney building in Los Angeles. This is another way of expressing himself. This is the office tower in Barcelona. The beauty of Arata Isozaki is that you cannot actually identify the architect of the building behind his architecture. He has transformed himself so much. He changes his ideas so much. He lives to the context, he lives to the times of his architecture. This is the Qatar Convention Center in Doha. See where he has started and where he has gone. You can't actually identify these two buildings are done by the same architect so easily. That is the architecture of Arata Isozaki. Indian architecture is B.V. Doshi, Balakrishna Vittal Das Doshi. He trained directly under Le Corbusier and Louis Kahn, and he hailed from Ahmedabad. He is one of the masters of Indian architecture, modern Indian architecture. He was behind a lot of unique buildings, and he has experimented in a lot of forms with an artist. Here you see the Gufa in Ahmedabad done along with M.F. Hussain. This is one building which he was inspired from heavily from the streets of India, the tropical nature of India. This is the IIM Bangalore. Another view of the same. This is his own office building in Ahmedabad called the Sangat, and see how he has emerged his forms from geometry. This is a truly modernistic version of his ideas. Cesare Pelli is one of the living legends of architecture who started his architecture from Italy. This is a contemporary Art Museum in Osaka. This is one of his recent buildings, but this is another famous building designed by him, the Petronas Tower in Malaysia, hailed as one of the tallest buildings of its time. This is the World Finance Center in New York, another view of it. See how he has emerged from high-rise buildings to different localities. Charles Correa is another great architect from India. He died last year. He was truly a master in emerging forms. He had great respect to Indian architecture, the traditional concepts of Vastu. You can see how his buildings emerged from simple geometry into great architecture, influential architecture. This is the Vidhan Sabha in Bhopal. This is Jawahar Kala Kendra in Jaipur. The same building with a lot of uses of geometric building along with critical regionalism. See how he uses Indian motifs in his buildings. This is the exemplary work of Charles Correa in Mumbai, Kanchenjunga Apartments. See how he has emerged the form. He has broken the convention of plain flat floors into broken floors and double heights, and then how he has built the form. Is one of the most easily identifiable building in the world, fantastically designed, the Kanchenjunga Apartments in Mumbai. See, he was heavily influenced by the Sanchi Stupa, which was in Bhopal, which you could see in this building. So, he takes the regional context heavily into his buildings. Eero Saarinen is one of the earlier masters of United States of America. He is building the arch of along the Missouri River, the Dallas Washington Airport. This is the the Los Angeles Airport Terminal entrance building. It was an iconic structure. See how he has emerged out of deriving a form. Can we believe this is a church? No, it is not, but how he has derived this form. This is the interior of the airport that is designed TWA. See how futuristic it is. Looks like a bird about to fly. Frank Lloyd Wright is arguably the greatest American architect ever lived. He was a modernist. The Falling Waters, the most photographed building of its time. His idea was the organic architecture, in which he says that architecture has to live with nature. This is one of these urban contributions in New York. How he has broken the convention of architecture into something great. This is a museum for Guggenheim Center, where the floors actually spiral up into the top, and they are not flat roofings. So, people do not actually they walk up a ramp in order to see all the artifacts. This is a recent photograph of the same. This is a Johnson Wax building where he tried something great. This is in 1950s. This is one of the most beautifully designed corporate buildings of its time. See the innovative architecture that he has done, the dendronic columns that they call it. So, he has innovated so much in the structure itself. This is his famous style called the Prairie style. This is a Roby house in Chicago, and so typical of his architecture, a lot of horizontal lines. The building has to be along with nature, that is what his idea is. The building has to be horizontal, it has to spread through nature, it should not emerge out, strut out from its context. Another example of a Prairie style, another example of him, a true master of his times. I.M. Pai, born as a Chinese architect, born in China but brought up in United States. He used the freedom in the United States, and he trained as architect for more than 8 years, and then he comes up with simplified architectural buildings, very strong in its character, the simplicity, the dignity. This is a Boston Center, the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston, another look of it. The Shanghai building in Hong Kong is one of the most highly recognized buildings in the world, and the Louvre Museum, of course, it was designed by I.M. Pai in Paris. He was heavily influenced by the pyramids, so he used a glass pyramid. This is a science center in Macau. See how he has used form to build up a science center. This is one of the most recognized building in the history of modern architecture in United States, the National Gallery of Modern Art in New York. See how the simple lines but the sharp lines of the buildings. Kenzo Tange, he started his architecture in the 1940s because Japan has to build itself from the ruins of World War II. He was the root cause of Japan's emergence from zero to the greatness as it is today. So, his architecture is a true modernist in the sense from Japan. He understood Japanese regionalism very well. This is the Hiroshima memorial that he built. See the straight lines, see the simplified lines in architecture. This was way away from the regionalism of Japan in Tokyo. He was also part of some great movements called the metabolism, directly deriving ideas from biology of growth in different ways. So, this building is the Metabolist Tower in Tokyo, one of the most admired building of him. This is a church in Tokyo, St. Mary's Church Cathedral. It is a highly recognizable building in Tokyo. He has used the traditions of the cruciform in plan, but expressed it differently in 3D. This is a Yamanashi Press building. See the kind of robustness that he has done. This is a Yoyogi Olympic Stadium that he has built for Tokyo Olympics. Look at the way it is designed from the, he says that he is inspired by the samurais and the swords they use and how that form emerged. Kisho Kurokawa is another great architect from Japan. He was mainly seen noted for his vigor in architecture. His buildings were always very strongly, boldly expressing itself. This was done in the 50s and 60s. He worked along with Kenzo Tange, masters of Kenzo Tange. He is a master himself. This is the Ozura Bank. This is a Fukuoka Bank building. One of the most hated buildings in modern history is this building. This is a Lippo building in Hong Kong. See how machinated this building looks. This is one of the most recognizable building of its movement, the movement called the metabolism. This is the Nakagin Capsule Tower. The Saitama Museum of Modern Art in Tokyo, in Japan. This is another building. This is a Kojima building, which actually was designed like a machine, as you can see. This man needs no introduction. He is the greatest architect ever lived, greatest modern architect ever lived. We were lucky in India to have him, to have direct influence. He was an exemplary artist and sculptor. The Chandigarh Assembly building donated by him to India, the Chandigarh High Court. He was a master in forms, so to say. This was a concrete building. He showed the world how to use concrete. The concrete has to be built like in free form. So, this is a church building. He broke all the conventions of a church, the cruciforms of church into this. This is a mill owners building in Ahmedabad, where he used the elements called the brise de soleil, the sun cutters in his building for the heavy summers of India. Typical style of him to use ramps for the buildings and the brise de soleil and the pilotis, so to say. This is a Unité d'habitation in France. This is an apartment building. It is one of these earliest types of its kind, housing in a vertical manner. The pilot is the whole building is tilted on top, and this is the culmination of all his philosophy. He says a building has to float. So, the whole floor is left for nature, the whole building is tilted, and all your building is, the functional areas are in the upper floors, and then you have these horizontal openings or the vertical openings, and there is a free flow of form inside. Louis Kahn, the greatest influencing architect of our time, he was a great theoretician. He wanted every office building purely from theory. This is a Dhaka assembly building designed by him. He says that every material has to be respected, for it can become a great, it can form an ingredient of a great building. The Dhaka assembly building, the IIM Ahmedabad, the Kimball Art Museum, these are some of the greatest buildings of his emerged from his theory. The Philip Exeter Library, see how he uses light into his building. The Salk Institute in La Jolla, the Salk Institute, detail of it in concrete. The Yale University Library, where he uses openings so interestingly, a true master and theoretician. Michael Graves is a postmodernist stylish architect. He says that ornamentation has to be respected, the classicism has to be respected, so he was highly criticized. So his modern buildings, though they are modern to a level, they will express the classicism in one way or the other by having funny, so to say, funny decorations. So here it's evident by this architecture, the use of color, the use of pediment shaped in his buildings, even though they are out of proportion. They are typified by use of square openings and contrasting colors in his building. This is a typical example of the Portland building in Oregon. It is one of the exemplary works of Michael Graves as a postmodernist. You have modern buildings, but still at the same time it calls for some classicism in it. The Portland building. Mies van der Rohe, he was the architect behind the philosophy called the less is more, what is called minimalism today. It is a raving philosophy today in contemporary architecture emerges from Mies van der Rohe. Look at his building, this was done in the 1920s. See the simplicity in his buildings, the dignity in his buildings. This is a Barcelona pavilion. This is a Farnsworth house that he designed. This is an exemplary building with simple structural elements and simple form of the building. The Farnsworth house. The whole building is tilted and very minimal elements is used functionally. Only the slabs and minimal walls and all glass and technology. Very simplified, very dignified, very minimal. He was also the architect of IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology's main hall. See the kind of emergence of form that he has done. He was the first to show the world how to use glasses in his building. So you see a lot of glass in his building. This is Seagram's building in New York. This is the first building or the greatest building to have curtain walls in it, the Seagram's building. Oscar Niemeyer is an architect to reckon in continent of South America. We recently celebrated his centenary year, Oscar Niemeyer. This building is the Cathedral of Brasilia. He was the man behind the creation of Brasilia, the new capital of Brazil from Rio de Janeiro. He was a pure modernist. This is a church building. This is a Congress building that he designed for the assembly, the building that he designed for the new capital of Brazil, the Brasilia. See the simplified forms that he has used, which gives a telling effect. This is a Palacio mansions. These are actually the residential buildings for the government officials. See how is used forms. You can also see the similarity between this and Corbusier's Chandigarh building. This is the Rio Museum inspired by his work. Philip Johnson is another postmodernist, a force to reckon in American architecture. He was a quintessential postmodernist where he said that classicism has to be respected as well in modern buildings. Even though his buildings are modern, classicism was respected. This was a very controversial building, the AT&T building in New York, which had a pediment on top. He was also famous for the glass house, which was because he was a very close friend of Mies van der Rohe. So he designed this Farnsworth building to the next level. This is the glass house, very simplified, very direct, very modern. Only the part that is the toilet inside the building is with the opaque wall. Rest of all, everything is glass open to the outside. The interior part of the building. This is a Houston Bank America in Bank America building in Houston. You can see how he has replicated country houses and its proportion, classic proportion in a high-rise building. The Bank America building in Houston. And this is one of his later buildings, very recent buildings, the Porto de Europa in Barcelona. See how he emerges, forms from simplicity. I will conclude the first part of works of architects with Nervi, Pierluigi Nervi. He was not conventionally an architect, but he was a structural designer as well as an architect. He has given a lot of inputs to a lot of architects by emerging long span buildings in concrete. You can see the beauty that he has developed in his forms. This is a church building done completely in concrete, one of the details of the building. His Palazzo del Sporto in Italy was a highly recognizable building. This building was used for Rome Olympics. Simplified structural design, structural forms, repeated, giving a great form into architecture. That is Pierluigi Nervi. So, from the works of architects, what do we get? We say that what is the purpose of architecture as a human product? How does architecture influence us, because we are talking about individual architects and their influences through their ideologies and theory. Why buildings from a particular period has a particular form, like we saw in postmodern buildings. How to make architecture as a sensitive medium, is it strong enough to influence us, urban life or rural? Is formal differentiation for function of buildings required? So, these could be some inquisitive inquiries that we could make from the works of architects. What you could do as an assignment is choose a prominent building or a prominent architect of your choice, study his architecture, his influences, his history, what made him great and what really stands out in the history of architecture. Thank you.